thought my wild past was hidden, but he used it to destroy my reputation. Hello, Reddit. I honestly never thought I'd be sharing this kind of story here, but I don't know where else to turn. My life feels like it's in shambles, and I just need to get it all out. I'm not sure if I'm looking for advice, support, or just someone to tell me that I'm not crazy. Anyways, here it goes. A little background. My name is Amy, and I'm a 35-year-old woman. My husband, let's call him Jack for the sake of privacy, is 22. We met on a dating app, and it was one of those rare love-at-first-sight moments. From our very first date, everything just felt right. There was this immediate chemistry, and somehow, everything was so easy with him. We were that couple people looked at and said, "You two are perfect together." It felt like we could talk about anything, laugh about everything, and always be completely ourselves with each other. I'd never had that before. We dated for a little over a year before getting engaged. It was a whirlwind romance, but it just felt natural. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if we rushed things, but at the time, nothing felt too fast. After a few months of engagement, we had a beautiful, intimate wedding with just our closest family and friends. I remember feeling so lucky on our wedding day, like I'd finally found the person I was meant to be with. There were no doubts, no second thoughts, just excitement and joy for our future together. Now, one thing I'm going to be upfront about here is that I had a very wild past. Like, when I say wild, I don't mean just the casual party girl who goes out on weekends, has a drink or two, and makes it home by midnight. I mean full-blown, no regrets, do-it-all, experience-it-all phase. College was my time to live freely, and I was living it up, thank you very much. At first, I didn't regret a single thing about my past. I felt liberated, and I believed life was too short to live by the boring rules society wanted to impose on me. Who cared, right? I was young, it was my life, my choices, and I wasn't hurting anyone. So what if I wasn't sitting quietly at home every Friday night with my nose in a book? I was out there living. So sure, if people wanted to judge, let them judge. I wasn't going to waste my time caring about it. But as I got older, as my 20s rolled on and the party days started to feel a little emptier, I began to look back with a different perspective. By the time I met Jack, that entire phase started to feel embarrassing. I'd brush it off in my mind, but there was this gnawing feeling of regret that crept in when I thought too much about it. I'd hear the echoes of the warnings people gave me back then. Warnings I'd laughed off. People close to me, distant relatives, even casual acquaintances who caught wind of my lifestyle, all tried to give me a reality check. They'd tell me I was going down the wrong path, that I'd regret this, that these things don't just disappear. I chalked it up to jealousy or hypocrisy. I'd tell myself that they just wished they could be as free as I was, or maybe they had their own skeletons they were ashamed to admit. I thought I was above their judgments, that they were the ones trapped in narrow-minded boxes. But as the years went by, the truth started to seep in. They were right. Living that way wasn't as glamorous as I'd built it up to be in my head. I began to see how my choices had left a mark on me, how they'd stained my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. I started to understand why people had cautioned me, and for the first time I felt the weight of my past. By the time I met Jack, I realized that my past was something I'd rather keep hidden. The thrill of being the wild girl had faded, and it had been replaced by a lingering embarrassment. I'd had some relationships here and there before Jack, but every time I tried being honest about my history, I saw it affecting the relationship. People would pull back, their interest would wane, and it became painfully clear that my past was a deal-breaker for them. So I stopped being upfront. I stopped talking about it, burying it as deep as I could. And then Jack came along, and I didn't want to risk losing him. He was different. He was the kind of man I wanted to build a future with. And for the first time, I genuinely cared about how someone saw me. I didn't want him to look at me differently, to see me as the girl I used to be instead of the woman I wanted to become. I didn't want to lose him over things that, to me, felt like ancient history. So I made a decision. I kept my past locked away, hiding the parts of myself I was no longer proud of. It wasn't lying, I told myself. It was just sparing him from something that didn't matter anymore. I thought it was the right decision. In my mind, I was protecting us, our future, our happiness. I thought that if I could just leave the past in the past, everything would be fine. Another major reason why I did that was because I was ashamed. I didn't want Jack to know the real truth, to know every messy detail of who I'd been. I knew he loved me, but there was this constant fear that, if he found out about everything, he'd see me differently. He'd see me as that girl from years ago, not the person I wanted to be for him now. And honestly, I couldn't bear the thought of him leaving. I loved him truly, so I convinced myself it was better this way. The past was the past, right? It didn't have to affect us. Deep down, I knew I should have been upfront. Part of me even knew he deserved to hear it from me instead of finding out some other way. But it was easier to just push it down, to pretend none of it mattered anymore. In my mind, I thought I was protecting our relationship. I thought maybe with enough time it wouldn't matter at all. My past could stay buried, locked away in some corner of my mind where Jack would never go. I guess I underestimated him. Jack was kind, compassionate, and open-minded, but he also wasn't stupid. I knew he sensed there were parts of me I was holding back, bits of my life that didn't add up. He'd ask questions here and there, small ones that didn't seem like a big deal, and I'd brush them off, or I'd dodge them, answer vaguely, try to steer the conversation in a different direction. And it worked for a while. I guess I've learned now that hiding something out of shame is just another form of dishonesty. I thought I could escape my past, but I was just lying to myself and to him. And I know that's why he felt so blindsided. It wasn't just about the wild stories. It was about me withholding something real, something that defined who I was for so long. Jack eventually found out from my mother, and honestly, it couldn't have been a worse way for him to find out. She's never been one to filter her words or keep secrets, and somehow she let it slip. To this day, I don't know how the conversation went or what exactly she told him. I didn't even get a heads up, it just happened. All I know is that afterwards, that's when things started to shift between us. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or an immediate fallout. No, it was much slower, like so quiet that I didn't even notice at first. At first, Jack just seemed a little distant. I brushed it off as stress. He had recently gotten a promotion, and I knew his new role came with added responsibilities. So when he spent more time on his phone or stayed late at work, I figured he was just adapting to the demands of his job. He asked me a few times if I was hiding anything from him, and I laughed it off, thinking he was just joking, or maybe feeling a little insecure. I reassured him that there was nothing going on, that he was overthinking. But looking back now, I can see he wasn't just asking out of curiosity, he was fishing for the truth. And when I think about it, he probably already knew. I just kept telling myself it was work stress. I didn't want to acknowledge the changes because admitting something was wrong meant having to deal with it. So I pretended everything was fine, that Jack was just going through a rough patch. As more time passed, though, his distance grew. He wasn't just physically absent, he was emotionally gone too. Whenever I tried to bring up how I was feeling, he would sigh and tell me he just needed time to himself, that it was nothing personal. I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to believe that this was just a phase, that every marriage had its ups and downs. I convinced myself it was temporary, that we just needed to ride it out. I wanted to be the supportive wife, the one who stood by him through thick and thin. So I kept quiet, thinking it would somehow bring us closer. But instead of getting better, things only got worse. The man who once looked at me like I was his whole world was now looking through me as if I barely existed. He'd spend hours locked in his office or scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging me. I would try to make conversation, try to pull him back to me, but his responses were clipped, distant. It was like I was talking to a stranger. Desperation set in. I kept thinking of ways to fix things, anything to bring us back to how we used to be. I suggested date nights, hoping a change of scenery would help. I planned weekend getaways, thinking maybe we just needed to escape the daily grind. Sometimes he'd go along with it, but it was like he was humoring me, not really present. He'd smile politely, hold my hand, but it all felt forced, like he was playing a role. And it hurt, more than I care to admit. I felt like I was begging for scraps of his attention, clinging to whatever little piece of him I could still get. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about just telling him the truth, just laying everything out on the table. But I was too scared of what would happen, of how he'd look at me if he knew the full story. I was already losing him bit by bit. I didn't want to risk pushing him away completely. So I kept it all inside, hoping that maybe he'd just come around. Things got so bad that I finally turned to my mother for support. I told her about how distant and strained my marriage had become, about how Jack had changed ever since his last visit to her house. I was pouring my heart out, hoping for some reassurance or advice, when I noticed this horrified look on her face, a hint of guilt even. I could tell immediately that she knew something, and I wasn't going to let her brush it off. I pressed her, demanding to know if she'd said something to Jack. I had a sinking feeling, but I needed to hear it, and that's when she finally admitted it. She said that during Jack's last visit, she might have let slip a few things about my past, my wild years in college, as she called them. My mother has always been a bit of a goody two-shoes, a staunch Catholic who believes in honesty above all else, even when it's messy or hurtful. She's the type who would drag me to confession every time I did something sinful, so I knew she'd never agree with me hiding something so major from my husband. In her mind, keeping secrets was no better than lying, and lying was for the devil. That's exactly why I'd never told her that I hadn't come clean to Jack about my past. I knew she'd have pressured me to do the right thing, and I wasn't interested in her lectures on honesty and integrity. To her, my past wasn't just wild. It was something I had to make amends for, and being honest was just part of that penance. Looking back, I can see how naive I was to think she'd never bring it up with him. But at the time, I just didn't see why my past would ever come up between them. I figured it was my business, something that had no bearing on my current life, let alone my marriage. I genuinely believed it would never even cross her mind to mention it. But apparently I was wrong. My mom explained that during his last visit, she and Jack had been chatting, and somehow the conversation veered toward my college years. She didn't go into detail about what exactly she said, but it was clear enough. She hinted at my party phase, my no-regrets attitude back then, maybe even the kind of people I was hanging out with. She said that as soon as she saw the look on Jack's face, she knew he had no idea. She tried to downplay it, of course, but the damage was done. She suspected that he might have gone off and asked someone else about it, trying to find out more. I felt the blood drain from my face as she explained. It all made sense now. The subtle, almost weird changes in Jack's demeanor, the probing questions, the late nights at work, the emotional distance. I suddenly saw the whole picture clearly, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. And to be honest, I was furious. I was horrified that she talked about something so personal, so unnecessary. How could she betray me like that? I'd trusted her, however begrudgingly, to keep that part of my life out of my marriage. But instead, she'd been the one to crack it open. Everything I'd built with Jack, everything we'd shared, was now clouded by this new, ugly lens he saw me through. I was furious, devastated, and if I'm being honest, deeply afraid. I literally left my mom's place right then and there. I couldn't stand another second just sitting with the weight of what she'd told me, so I rushed home. I knew Jack would be there, and I was desperate to talk to him, to explain myself, to try and fix this mess. Maybe he'd see things from my perspective if he'd just listen, if I could find the right words to make him understand why I kept this secret. But when I got home, things got worse. Jack was still there, but the second he saw me, I could tell he already knew why I was back so soon. He had that look on his face, cold, hurt, like he'd been betrayed by the last person he thought would lie to him, and that's exactly what he thought. I could see it. I tried to apologize, to explain that it wasn't as simple as he was making it out to be, that I didn't tell him about my past because it was, well, my past. I'd grown up, I'd changed, and I didn't think he needed to know all the messy details of a time I'd long left behind. But he wasn't having any of it. The argument was probably the worst we've ever had, and we've had our share of arguments. He told me that he'd been waiting, just waiting for me to finally come clean on my own, and that's why he'd been so cold and distant. He didn't want to force it out of me, But he also couldn't look at me the same, couldn't get over the fact that I'd been hiding such a major part of myself. He said he felt like he'd married a stranger, like he'd been tricked into a relationship with someone who wasn't real. And honestly, that hurt. It hurt because, yes, I'd made mistakes in my past, but I wasn't that person anymore. Why couldn't he see that? I tried over and over to get him to understand that I hadn't told him because it wasn't relevant, that I didn't want him to judge me for things I'd done before I even knew him. I kept saying that it didn't define me anymore, that I'd left that part of my life behind. But he was angry, furious really, and he didn't hold back. He said that if he'd been in my shoes, he would have told me the truth from day one, that it wasn't fair to start a life with someone on the foundation of a lie. I tried to defend myself, to make him see that I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just wanted to leave that part of me in the past. But he couldn't hear me, and I felt like I was talking to a brick wall. It got so heated that, in the end, we both realized one of us had to leave. It was just too much to be under the same roof with so much anger and resentment boiling over. And since it was his house, I packed a bag, grabbed the essentials, and headed back to my parents' house. That was a week ago, a whole week of me agonizing, replaying every word of that argument in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have said or done differently. Since then, I've tried reaching out to him, trying to get through to him somehow, but he won't budge. Every message, every phone call goes unanswered or met with curt responses. He won't even consider hearing me out again, and it's like he's built up this wall around himself that I just can't get through. He told me bluntly that what hurts most isn't just my past, but the fact that he had to find out about it from someone else, that it was something his wife should have told him, that it's not the kind of thing you keep from your future partner. And I get that. I really do. I get that he feels hurt and betrayed, and I understand why he feels that way. But at the same time, I just don't know how to make him see my side. To me, my past was something I thought I could bury and move on from, something that I didn't need to drag into our life together. I thought that it could just be gone, hidden forever. And if I'm being completely honest, part of me is frustrated that he can't understand that I had my reasons for not telling him, that I didn't think it was relevant or worth the pain it would cause. Now I'm here, in limbo, waiting for a response, any sign that he might be ready to talk, that he might see there's more to me than a few years of mistakes. I keep hoping he'll come around, that he'll understand that I love him, that he's everything I want. I just want things to go back to the way they were, to the life we had before all this came crashing down. But I can't help but wonder, can we really go back? And if he doesn't, if he can't forgive this part of me, then what does that mean for us? Update. Hello, Reddit. So here I am again, back to update, vent, and maybe just make sense of everything that's been happening. When I made my first post, I got absolutely roasted, and honestly, I deserved it. I knew that keeping my past a secret from my husband was a huge mistake, but reading everyone's comments just hammered it in over and over. Yes, I know I messed up. Trust me, I get it. I've learned the hard way that withholding something significant from a partner is essentially lying. You don't need to keep telling me that. I'm living with that reality every single day. I lied by omission, but the reason I came here in the first place was to look for advice on how to fix things, on how to somehow make it right with Jack. I didn't need everyone to remind me of my mistakes. I already feel like a walking reminder of them. But here we are. And to everyone who's still DMing me, asking for updates like my life is some kind of soap opera, I guess there's no harm in filling you in. A lot has happened since my last post, more than I ever could have anticipated, and a lot of it has been really painful. To give you some background, after my husband found out about my past, thank you, Mom, things spiraled pretty quickly. I tried to apologize, to explain why I'd kept that part of my life hidden, but Jack couldn't get past the betrayal. We tried talking it out, but nothing seemed to reach him, so I eventually suggested marriage counseling. I figured it was a last-ditch effort, but I hoped that with some professional help, we'd at least have a chance to rebuild our trust. But it was clear from the first session that Jack was already checked out. He was polite, civil, but emotionally distant, as if he'd already made up his mind. During one of our counseling sessions, he finally came out and said he wanted a divorce. I begged him to reconsider, told him I was willing to do whatever it took to make it work, but he just looked at me with this exhausted expression and said he didn't think there was anything left to fix. That's when it hit me. He was done. Truly done. I was devastated, and honestly, I still am. I tried to keep it together, to push through the day-to-day stuff, but I've been in a complete fog. I feel like I'm just going through the motions, barely present. Work used to be my escape, a place where I felt confident and competent, but now even that's falling apart. It started subtly. At first, I noticed people acting a little differently around me. Colleagues I used to chat with during lunch suddenly kept their distance. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop or shift awkwardly. It was like everyone knew something I didn't, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I thought maybe they'd just heard about the divorce and didn't know how to bring it up. But the more I looked around, the more I noticed the glances, the whispers. It was like there was something ugly under the surface, but no one was willing to tell me what was going on. Then, during a meeting, a coworker made an offhand comment that caught me off guard. They mentioned a rumor before quickly shutting down, realizing they'd let something slip. I pressed them, desperate to know what was being said about me. Eventually, they admitted that stories from my college days, those same stories that Jack had found out about, had somehow made their way through the entire office. Someone had spread all the details about my wild phase and spun it into office gossip. Every rumor, every exaggerated story from my past was now common knowledge. I couldn't believe it. It was like my worst nightmare. Everything I'd tried to leave behind, now out in the open for people to judge and whisper about. The impact has been brutal. People look at me like I'm a completely different person, like my past has tainted everything about me now. My hard work, my achievements, my friendships, none of it seems to matter anymore. It's all overshadowed by this version of me that people think they know, a version based on half-truths and exaggerations. I feel like everything I've built is crumbling, and I don't know how to stop it. So now, not only am I dealing with the pain of my marriage ending, but I'm also losing the one place I thought I could find some solace. My career, my reputation, my friendships at work, all of it is falling apart. I don't know who started the rumors, and at this point, I don't know if it even matters. I'm exhausted from trying to fight the fallout of mistakes I made years ago, mistakes I thought were long buried. I know I messed up by not telling Jack, by not being upfront about who I used to be, but this feels like punishment beyond anything I could have anticipated. I came here for advice, hoping someone might have a suggestion on how to pick up the pieces, how to rebuild when everything feels like it's slipping away. I just want a way forward, a way to stop feeling like I'm drowning in the consequences of my past. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been a while, hasn't it? I honestly didn't plan on posting again, but here I am. A couple of weeks ago, I got served the divorce papers. Funny enough, that's what reminded me of my account here. I realized I hadn't updated you all in a while. So, yeah, Jack is moving forward with the divorce, and everything in my life feels like it's spiraling out of control. My relationship with my parents is strained, to say the least. We're barely speaking these days, and it's almost as if they've washed their hands of me. They've hinted that I'll need to start paying rent soon, and while I get it, it feels strange and isolating to feel like a tenant in my own family's home. I thought they'd be more supportive, but I guess even they're struggling to deal with everything that's been happening. Then there's work. After the rumors spread about my past, my professional life turned into a nightmare. I initially thought Jack was behind it all, that he'd gone out of his way to ruin my reputation as payback. But when I confronted him, he flat out denied it. I actually believe him. It's weird to say that, but as hurt as he is, it just doesn't feel like something Jack would do. That only makes it worse, though, because if it wasn't him, then who would go this far to destroy my life? Someone close to him must have done it, someone who knew me back then and wanted to hurt me. The rumors weren't just vague whispers either. Whoever started them had gone out of their way to dig up specific details, even circulating pictures from my college days. pictures I hadn't seen in years. The person painted me as reckless, irresponsible, and completely immoral, as if I hadn't grown up or changed at all. Now, everyone at work sees me as the wild college girl I used to be, not the competent professional I've worked so hard to become. The fallout spread beyond the office, too. Friends that I thought I could rely on have started to distance themselves. It feels like everyone is taking Jack's side, even if they don't know the whole story. I'm not getting invited to gatherings anymore because they think it would be too awkward for Jack. Even distant relatives have heard about the rumors. A cousin I haven't spoken to in years texted me, asking if I was okay. It was like a punch to the gut, realizing just how far-reaching this mess had become. I'm stuck in a nightmare I can't wake up from, and I feel completely powerless to stop it. At work, my reputation is in tatters. I was in line for a promotion that I'd been working toward for years, but now it's clear I'm no longer being considered. They didn't say it outright, but the looks, the subtle comments, it was obvious. Even some clients I used to work with have pulled away, probably because they don't want to be associated with me now. I've become the person people whisper about in the office, the one they avoid eye contact with. I tried to explain myself, to clear up the rumors and defend my reputation, but every word just made things worse. No one wanted to hear the truth. They only cared about the sensationalized version they'd been told. Whoever was behind this had done their job well. They'd framed things so perfectly that every attempt I made to set the record straight only reinforced their story. I felt like a prisoner of my own past, trapped by mistakes I thought I'd left behind. Eventually, I realized I couldn't stay there. The atmosphere had become toxic, and I knew I'd never escape the shadow that had been cast over me. So I quit. I packed up my things, took one last look around the office, and walked out with my head held as high as I could manage, even though I felt completely broken inside. It felt like the end of an era, like I was leaving behind everything I'd worked so hard for, but I also knew I couldn't keep fighting a battle I'd already lost. Now I'm at a crossroads. Part of me is considering moving to another city once the divorce is finalized, starting over somewhere fresh, where I don't have to live in the shadow of my past mistakes. I know I'm not perfect. I know I have a past, but I never imagined things would get this bad. I thought I could outrun it, build a life that wasn't defined by who I used to be, but maybe I was wrong. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time, trying to figure out my next steps. I'm not sure where I'll end up or how I'll rebuild, but I do know one thing. I can't keep living like this. I need a fresh start, somewhere I can truly be myself without constantly looking over my shoulder. I just hope that's still possible. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been a while, hasn't it? I've been caught up in the messiness of real life, which is why I haven't updated, but I felt like I owed you all this final post. Maybe it's just something I need to do for closure, to put this whole chapter behind me. So, here goes. For those who were invested in the outcome, you'll probably be glad to hear that the divorce is final. It's done. There wasn't much to fight over, really. No kids, no shared debts, no pets. All his property stayed his, and it was over almost as quickly as it began. I walked out of that courtroom feeling empty, not relieved or free, just empty. It was like the last thread holding together my old life had finally been cut, and now I'm here, floating in this weird limbo that doesn't feel like my life at all. After the divorce, things with my family got even worse. My relationship with my parents was already strained, but now it's like we're barely speaking. They haven't exactly been supportive, and it's left me feeling more isolated than ever. I didn't want to stay in the same place, surrounded by people and memories that kept reminding me of everything I'd lost, so I packed up and moved to a new state. It wasn't some grand adventure or fresh start like you might imagine. It was just me, trying to get away from a past that still feels all too present. Am I thriving in this new place? Not really. But I'm here, I'm trying, and I guess that's something. I go through the motions every day, but the loneliness is crushing. I miss my old life so much. I miss my friends, the ones who stopped talking to me, and even the ones who stayed but are now so far away. I miss having a routine, a place where I felt I belonged. And most of all, I miss Jack. I miss him more than I can put into words. Even after everything, after all the hurt and the mistakes, there's this part of me that just can't let go. I know it sounds pathetic, but it's the truth. I wish I could say that moving on has been empowering or transformative, but honestly, it's just been painful. There are no big revelations, no miraculous recoveries. I'm just here, taking things one day at a time. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in my own misery, just waiting for something to change. But nothing does, at least not yet. I'll admit it. I still stalk Jack's social media. I know it's unhealthy. I know it's probably the worst thing I could do to myself right now, but I can't stop. Every time I type his name into the search bar, I feel this weird mix of dread and hope, like maybe just seeing him living his life might make me feel closer to him, even though I know he's moved on. Every picture, every post, every tagged photo makes my heart ache. I keep seeing him with friends, laughing, looking like he's doing just fine. It's not that I want him to be miserable, but I guess a small part of me wishes he felt even a fraction of the pain I'm going through. Seeing him happy makes me feel like everything we had was so easily erased, like I never mattered as much to him as he did to me. And maybe that's just my guilt talking, or maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I can't help feeling that way. I miss him so much that it physically hurts sometimes. I'll be doing something completely mundane, and suddenly it hits me like a wave. Memories come flooding back, random moments, tiny details that wouldn't matter to anyone else. I'll remember the way he'd make me coffee just the way I liked it, or the way he'd squeeze my hand during a movie when he knew I was getting emotional. It's those small things that make it feel like I lost not just a person, but a part of myself, a part of my everyday life that I'll never get back. And God, do I regret everything? If I could go back in time, I'd do it all differently. I'd never make those reckless decisions in college, those stupid mistakes that have haunted me all the way into my adult life. I think about how naive I was, how I thought that those choices were just a part of finding myself and having fun. But now all I see are the consequences. I know logically that dwelling on what-ifs won't change anything, but it's hard to let go when all I want is a second chance. Just one more opportunity to make things right, to show Jack that I'm not that same impulsive, immature person anymore. But life doesn't work that way, does it? You don't get to rewind and fix things. You just have to live with the choices you made, no matter how heavy they feel on your heart. I'm sorry if this isn't the dramatic, shocking update you were hoping for. I know a lot of people come to Reddit looking for the crazy stories, the wow, I didn't see that coming kind of endings. This isn't that kind of story. It's just me, sitting in an empty apartment, typing this out because I can't sleep, and I needed to get it off my chest. So that's it. The divorce is final. I'm alone. I'm miserable. I'm trying to rebuild, but it's hard, and I'm not there yet. I don't know if I'll ever really be over this, but I'm going to keep trying. That's all I can do for now. Thanks for listening, I guess.